All right, we are going to go ahead and get started. Welcome, everyone, to this fifth and final webinar in the 2025-2026 Farm to Institution webinar series, Voices of the Network. We're really happy that you're here today. My name is Hannah Layton. I am the co-executive director at FINE. Helping out on today's webinar is FINE's other co-executive director, Tanya Taranovsky, and communications director, Sarah Lyman, who are here to provide tech support. You'll see them floating around the chat. So if you need anything at all, feel free to put a message in the chat there. We would love to hear from you who's in the room. So please feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. You can tell us your name, where you're coming from, and if there's anything in particular you want to call out in terms of what you're interested in hearing about and learning about in today's webinar. It's always great to know who's in the room. So before I hand it over to our presenters, I just want to share a little bit about Farm to Institution New England. FINE is a dynamic network of communities, organizations, and institutions working together to create a just, equitable, and regenerative food system in New England and beyond. And we at FINE believe that institutions hold substantial power and wield a lot of influence on our food system through their food service, education, investment, employment, land use. And we know that developing institutional food value chains that are responsive to community needs and rooted in racial justice, food sovereignty, and climate resilience is a really critical way to leverage the power of those institutions to change the food system. And we also believe that the changes we see can only be achieved when led by a collaborative and adaptive network, and that's all of us here together. If you want to read a little bit more about FINE and the Farm to Institution Network, including our work over the last year, you can check out our impact report. Tanya is going to drop that in the chat along with some other information. And yeah, feel free to reach out if you ever want to talk about anything Farm to Institution related. So I'm going to just share, go to the next slide, Sarah. FINE has been hosting a monthly webinar series throughout the fall of 2025 and winter of 2026 as a way to keep the energy going from last spring's Northeast Farm to Institution Summit. We'd like to send a very special thank you to the Henry P. Kendall Foundation for supporting FINE and this webinar series. This is actually the final webinar in our series, so we're very excited to have you all here. And you can review all the recordings from the past four on our website, and Tanya is going to drop that in the chat as well. You can go to the next slide. So our plan for today, our webinar is titled Unlocking the Full Potential of School Food. And we have an hour together. So we're going to hear from two different speakers. We'll make sure to leave plenty of time at the end for questions in our last like 10 or 15 minutes or so. And if you have any questions at all throughout the presentation, please feel free to drop them in the chat at any time. And we'll have time to get those questions answered at the end. And at the end of the webinar, we'd be really grateful if you would answer our very brief evaluation survey, and that will close things out. So with that, I am going to introduce our speakers. William Brenneman is a master's student at the University of Maine studying anthropology and environmental policy. He is a graduate research assistant with the Senator George J. Mitchell Center for Sustainability Solutions, where he works with Suzanne Lee to lead the 2025 Maine School Cafeteria Wasted Food Study and the Maine School Cafeteria No More Wasted Food DIY Toolkit. Suzanne Lee joined the Mitchell Center as a faculty fellow in the fall of 2021 and leads a student faculty team that's working directly with state, business, and community stakeholders, as well as national and global food waste experts to develop solutions to end food waste in Maine. Prior to joining the Mitchell Center, Suzanne's career as an entrepreneurial business executive saw her successfully creating, launching, and operating multi-million-dollar consumer product brands and businesses with Fortune 100 companies. We are very pleased to have William and Suzanne with us today. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to you, Suzanne.
Thank you very much. Thank you to all of you for joining today. Thank you so much to the FINE organization, Tanya, Hannah, and Sarah, for making it possible for us to present to you the work that we've been doing at the University of Maine on school food systems. So I will just get started. today's presentation, why you're all here, unlocking the full potential of school food systems. So we are finally going to talk to you about how that will happen, how reducing wasted food can help save money, improve nutrition, and support local food for New England's K through 12 schools, based on the work that we have been doing in Maine. So just to say a few words about our style of presentation, you know, this is really part of our outreach. We've done the research, but it's really important to share the findings and make it useful for audiences like you. So we'll go through the information today, but please feel free at any point that you have questions. There's a question session at the end, but we're also happy. There'll be some charts, there'll be some slides. We've been working with this data for, 4 years now. So if anything pops into your and you just really need to have the question answered, please feel free to put it in the chat, and with the team here, we'll get to it so that so it can be sort of interactive and back and forth. So anyway, we'll get started now. Next slide. So who are we? Just a little bit of introduction. We're, as Hannah said, at the University of Maine. It's Maine's land-grant university, and we think it's important to mention that because it's really what we are about in our work. It's about the research, and it's then about the teaching, about what we're learning, and most importantly is sort of the third piece, which is a real outreach through our extension and through actually the work that we do. So, and in support, specifically land-grant universities are intended to support our agricultural community. So this work is all wrapped up in that. And particularly our team is at the Mitchell Center for Sustainability Solutions, which is a research center. So we don't teach classes per se out of the Mitchell Center, but we do work with the state in teams, multidisciplinary teams. So important to have a variety of specialty experts, and important to have students on these teams to solve the problems that the state is dealing with related to sustainability issues. So we work with a large team. Ours is focused on materials management, and specifically the key stakeholders in our work. So the people that we work with a lot at the state are the Department of Environmental Protection, and particularly in today's presentation, the Department of Education, Child Nutrition, without whom this work would not be possible, but Good Shepherd Food Bank, Natural Resources Council of Maine. And then we even, as was said in the thing, we work nationally and internationally. So a big supporter of our work has been World Wildlife Fund with their Food Waste Warriors program. So these are sort of the key stakeholders in the work. And our specific program within the Mitchell Center is titled Food Rescue Maine. And so while we're here today talking about the work we've done in schools, our overall goal is to end wasted food in Maine through a variety of solutions, which we call sort of our big 6 solutions. So the work we've done today is sort of grounded in work that's the solutions are tracking and measuring. So we have a lot of programs with businesses, communities tracking and measuring wasted food, because you need to understand what that data is before you can develop solutions. We also work, education is a big solution area. And of course, today's presentation pertains to that. We also have a website. We do an annual food waste summit. We have a social media program. So a lot of efforts to educate the public in Maine about the wasted food problem and the solutions. We also work with food recovery. So that's where Good Shepherd Food Bank is a big partner. We try to make sure that ending wasted food is related to, of course, getting good edible food to the people who need it. Another solution 4 relates to infrastructure. So we also do infrastructure projects, things related to processing and storage that can help food not go to waste. Solution 5 is we do a lot to promote food donation. And our last solution area is solution 6, in which we promote wasted food diversion through composting programs in communities. So you'll see all of those solutions actually come together in our schoolwork. Next slide. So how did school food systems become a real focus for us? Well, through the efforts of our school nutrition professionals in Maine and change makers like the FINE organization, today's school food system has become a key community food resource. So it's not just something done at schools, but it's actually a central part of our food systems in communities in Maine. It's actually, if you don't know, the largest restaurant chain in our state, and actually in every state, perhaps by measurement of how many meals they serve per day. As a result, of course, procuring local produce and seafood is really, they're a major player and potentially could even be bigger. From scratch cooking is sort of an area that they've been working on, promoting or producing delicious and nutritious food options, and importantly, feeding our most critical population segment, children. It's where we see the highest levels of food insecurity, 1 in 5 children, and it's also the future of our state. So with all of this progress that we're making in doing this work, yet Maine's K through 12 schools still persist as one of the state's largest food waste generating sectors. By our food waste generation study, I think they're the 8th largest sector, wasting, or amounting to about 4,200 tons a year of wasted food. So next slide. So we're very happy to be here today talking to Food Farms to Institution New England, because we believe that reducing wasted food is important for New England schools in particular, because for one, New England schools have really led universal free school breakfast and lunch policies. Maine in particular has been a leader in making that a policy so that all of our students can enjoy free breakfast and lunch. It addresses also, and I'm sure this is not just Maine, but across New England, the issue of rising local school budget costs and, real pushback and just really hard discussions about the costs of school budgets. We also have an issue for the environmental challenges that are making food production in our region even harder. And we also feel that, the presentation is important for New England because every New England state now has a food waste ban. Maine was the last to adopt one, and which we did with LD 1065. So this work helps in compliance with those food waste bans. Next slide. And then, overall, I think the lead-in that Hannah gave about the role of Farm to Institution New England, a resilient, waste-free, sort of a circular food system goal, I guess I should say the circular food system, a resilient circular food system is a waste-free food system. So that's why we believe this work is also important, because the current school food system work is doing a great job of working to support local food producers. And we have a little graphic there to kind of show you what we mean by a circular food system, starting with the production and support for good local food production. Then it moves on. We need to make sure that students have access to that high quality, nutritious local foods. So that is also really great work that's happening today. And that's what I've highlighted in yellow. But if the work ends there in the yellow highlighted section, we actually have what's referred to as a linear food system, sort of a make and take, and it's not sustainable. And it does involve a lot of waste because anything that is not then eaten by students actually is disposed of. And so the work that we've done is to try to complete that circular food system loop, ensuring that not only do students have access to the wonderful food, but that they're eating the food, that the food that's not eaten is recovered to feed other people and then animals. And then finally, any remaining food scraps are actually collected to feed the soil, which then goes back to support production. So that is what our work has really been focused on in the areas that are not yet highlighted in yellow. And I would like to introduce our fantastic grad student, William Brenneman, who will go through the details of that work.
Thank you, Suzanne. I'm going to start off by taking a step back and talking about the issue of wasted food and how reducing it can benefit Maine schools. So the way we look at it at the Mitchell Center, the wicked problem of wasted food, as you may have heard it described, is with a triple bottom line approach. So we see wasted food as wasting financial resources. We see it as something that produces social harms, and then obviously something that affects the planet negatively. And we think schools and their wasted food reduction efforts can really be a big opportunity for addressing all three of these issues. So thinking, right, we had the three P's there. So the first one is profits, and we liken that to economic opportunity from wasted food reduction. The World Wildlife Fund has estimated that wasting food costs U.S. schools almost $2 billion each year. And that's just the food that students are not are being served but not eating. And that doesn't account for, right, the other valuable resources that go into producing this food along the supply chain, like fresh water, energy, labor, transportation, etc. And then reducing wasted food is an opportunity to support our communities socially. In Maine, Maine has the highest rate of food insecurity in New England, and Maine children are especially vulnerable to food insecurity. Yet, as Suzanne alluded to, wasted food in schools and in general in the state remains a big problem. Research shows that when students eat more in school and waste less, they're less likely to go hungry, and their families can save money on food expenditures. So there's a real social opportunity for reducing wasted food. And then the environmental opportunity. So the cost to our environment from wasting food, especially when food ends up in landfills, waste to energy plants, or wastewater treatment facilities. It produces air and water pollution, contributes to climate change by releasing greenhouse gases like methane, among other environmental damages. And to give you a scale of, or a sense of the scale of the problem, again, as Suzanne said, wasted food accounts for a uh, massive proportion of our state and most states' entire municipal solid waste composition. And it fills up landfill space where, as we just said, it does not belong in the first place. I'm going to pause here. You've all heard a little bit about how we approach the topic of wasted food, but you're all here for presumably slightly different reasons. So we want to hear a little bit from the audience for a moment. What are some of the things that concern you the most about wasted food? This could be what based on your experience in schools, but if you're not coming here from a school, what in general is your biggest concern about wasted food? Seeing some responses come in that, right, we've heard before. I like Robin's answer here, negatively impacting staff morale when they see food going in the trash. This is absolutely a concern. We work with kitchens across the state, and this is absolutely something that we hear. Right? Someone mentions, teaching kids that it's okay, to waste. Right? That's something we try to get away from. Right? Not getting nutrition, not learning about, right, the opportunities. And then, yeah, there's one comment here that wasted food is not discussed as part of the broader food systems work. And I think that's something we're trying to address in this talk today. So thank you all for sharing. I'm going to keep moving forward with those comments in mind, and I hope I can sort of address each of them in some way as I talk about how Maine schools are sort of leading the way in this kind of work. So we believe at Food Rescue Maine that the schools we've partnered with can be a model for the rest of New England and the rest of the country. By, on one hand, maintaining strong farm to institution ties in serving high quality, nutritious, appropriate foods, but also that missing link, keeping the food out of the trash and fully utilizing your school resources or school food resources. So this is the work that Hannah mentioned in my introduction, that Suzanne and I have been taking on from 2023 to 2025 we worked with a number of Maine schools. You can see on a little map on the left there. Um, those are all the schools we've worked with in the state to, one, reduce wasted food, and two, improve student nutrition. Our strategies for doing this are largely student directed. This is for a couple of reasons. One, this work started coming out of COVID, and there was a lot of pushback from kitchen staff in particular that they do not want their work to be too impacted by our interventions. And then second, what we've found measuring kitchen waste at some schools who let us, the kitchens tend to do a very good job limiting waste, and we found that it is the student side of things that is often the missing piece. So in 2023 and 2025, we worked with, like I said, 8 schools across Maine of various sizes and different locations, from the Canadian border to the New Hampshire border. And an important part of this study obviously was measuring wasted food across a 9-week period, measuring before and after a series of interventions. So now I'm going to get into what those interventions looked like. Our first and most important intervention was education. We kicked off our No More Wasted Food Challenge at each school with a school-wide assembly presentation where we share some of the information about the harms of wasted food, like that I just covered a little while ago. We also have more recently produced video versions of that presentation, and shared other resources like World Wildlife Fund's Food Waste Warriors K through 12 food waste curriculum packages. As a part of the study, we also put on a poster contest for students to share what they learned about wasted food. There's a couple other pictures of the posters throughout the presentation, but it's very cool to hear young students talking about things like methane emissions from landfills with food in it, or talking about different ways that they can compost, recycle, or repurpose food. And then the next intervention is infrastructure. This is our sorting station and signage. If the education provides students with the why to reduce wasted food, the infrastructural interventions provide them with the how. So in each school we worked with, we set up a sorting station. You can see on the left there, silverware, liquids, trash, food scraps, and trays. This allows us to separate food from food and liquids from the rest of the trash at the schools. This makes measuring possible. If we don't sort, we can't measure, and we don't have a good sense of how much each school is wasting. We also made fun food waste challenge graphs, so students in each school could follow along with their progress and try to do better each week. And students also enjoyed partaking in the measuring, whether it's weighing the big bins of wasted food after each lunch, or going up to the graph each week to check in on their progress. Students really got involved in the tracking and measuring phase as well. We eliminate disposables as much as we can. Disposable and single-use food packaging, like those ketchup packets or paper plates or plastic utensils, they contribute to contamination. So they often will be lumped in with wasted food that we don't want any plastic or plastic in at all. And then secondly, reusables like silverware, squeeze bottles, trays are more environmentally friendly, and they contribute to a better lunchroom environment. Students love, there was one great example where a school had metal silverware, got rid of it, and when we started working with this school, they brought it back. And the one student said to Suzanne when she dropped off the silverware, "They trust us again." And I think that went a long way into getting student buy-in into this kind of program. One of our most important interventions was the share cart and share fridge at some schools. Following Maine CDC guidance, right? Check your, your state CDC website for if they have a similar, um, you know, one-page guidance sheet. But we set up share baskets that give students the opportunity to, uh, right, share with others the food that they know they're not going to eat. That's a big part of the school cafeteria experience is for kids. They're often forced to take food items that they know they're not going to eat because they have to, right, there are certain requirements, nutritional requirements in place, right, to ensure students get, right, you can see a lot of bags of carrots there in the share basket picture. And right, we want students to eat carrots, but it's better that a student share the carrots they didn't eat with a friend than throw it out at the end of lunch after not eating it. So the share basket and the share fridge allow more people to uh, eat more of the nutritious food that our cafeterias are serving. We also empowered a lot of the older students we worked with to uh, help out in the cafeteria, guide their younger peers through the sorting station, help with weighing and measuring of wasted food. Um, and we got them these awesome Food Rescue Hero vests that were a big hit. We have a quote later on from a school principal, but the impact of the Food Rescue Hero volunteers on this project is massive. It couldn't have happened without students helping students. And then lastly, we make sure that all of the schools we work with are zero food waste schools. So, of course, students will still, despite educational interventions and other, right, the other things we do, sharing, etc., um, there's still going to be student plate waste. Sometimes it's unavoidable. Things like, orange peels, pineapple rinds. Um, some days, some meals produce more wasted food than others. Um, but to make sure that none of it is going in the trash or improperly disposed of, we partner with local composting companies like Garbage to Garden or AgriCycle throughout the state that will collect the food scraps on a regular schedule and either recycle it, turn it into compost, or turn it into energy through anaerobic digestion. In some of our schools, I'll talk about the one case a little later on, but sometimes we rely on feeding animals. In a rural state like Maine, um, right, a lot of rural schools are outside the service area for these compost collection companies. So being able to connect with local farmers to compost or feed animals is a major component of this work. Yeah, so I'll talk about three awesome exemplar schools before getting into some of the study-wide outcomes. But in Lisbon, Maine, you might have noticed on the map, we worked with Lisbon twice in 2023 and then in 2025. In 2023, we worked with their elementary school, and in 2025, their middle school, where a lot, two classes of students had gone in that time, from the elementary school to the middle school. So we were able to follow these students as they as they moved up into the middle school and tracking their plate waste reduction. Yeah, the reduction of the student plate waste from 2023 to 2025, they were able to achieve an almost 50% reduction of plate waste per student, which was by far and away the largest of any of the schools we worked with. And I think it shows the power of right, sticking with this kind of work and how it can reinforce itself, over time, right? These students weren't just hearing this one time. Um, they were introduced to it in 2023. Their nutrition director was all the way on board and got the whole district doing it. And by 2025, when we were back to measure again, they had continued to reduce. Also neat about Lisbon is that their town had a pre-existing rate set up with Garbage to Garden, one of those compost companies. So they were able to have their food scraps collected at little cost to the school. And then similarly in South Portland, the school that we worked with in South Portland had been paying for Garbage to Garden service, but they weren't separating their food scraps. They didn't have a sorting station, so they never put anything out to collect, yet they still paid a fee every month. We got them sorting, and they were able to utilize the Garbage to Garden connection that they had been paying for some time. And as a result, they've gotten in return compost back from Garbage to Garden that they're using to start a school garden. And then, as I mentioned earlier, in Easton, Maine, which is up by the Canadian border, a very small town, Amish farmers collect the food scraps to feed to their family pigs. That was a sort of solution that was out of necessity because, again, like I said, it's hard to serve some of these rural communities with traditional anaerobic digester or composting companies. So we reached out to our connections in the state, in Aroostook County up north, and we're able to make this great connection. All right, so now I'm going to get into some data, some study-wide data. Like Suzanne said, feel free to flag something if you want to return back to it in the Q&A section. There's a lot of data, and I don't have time to go in tremendous detail into all of it, but I'll do my best. So in this graph here, thinking about those economic, social, environmental outcomes, we're going to start with economic. In this graph here, basically takes the cost, or it takes all the food that students are not eating, that they're disposing of at lunch, and puts a monetary value on it. We estimated, right, taking the trends of from before our interventions and after our interventions in our study schools, which was about 1,600 students, that schools saved around $16,000 just on food not thrown in the trash. That's $16,000 worth of food in students' bellies. You could think of it like that. And right, extrapolating that to the whole state of Maine, which is about 172,000 students, right, the savings is well north of $1 million. But that's not the only economic benefit we've found for schools. Another big cost for Maine schools is waste hauling. What we did here was compare the cost of using a service like Garbage to Garden or AgriCycle to collect your food scraps, right, compared to the cost of keeping that waste, that the heaviest part of your waste, in your regular dumpsters. So for schools that already pay or already have a sort of what we call the low rate of municipal solid waste hauling, because this rate can depend on a lot of factors, especially like the location of your school in proximity to typical hauling routes. If you have a low rate, it might cost you a little more to utilize a service like Garbage to Garden or AgriCycle. But if you have a high rate, the savings can be huge, because not only right, are you already paying a lot of money per ton, but we're eliminating the wasted food from your dumpsters, the heaviest part, which the savings could be right north of $300 per school year. And then if you have a system like they had up in Easton, where they rely on volunteer farmers to collect the food for free, then there's only savings. All you're doing is taking away the heaviest part of your waste stream out of your dumpsters, and that can save between $400 and $800 per school year, which, again, as Suzanne alluded to, as school budgets seem to get tighter and tighter every year, this can make a huge impact. And then some testimonials from the school staff we worked with. One cook at Easton talks about how the sorting station sort of gets students to do some of the work that, right, the kitchen staff typically would. And at that school in particular, at Easton, they recently had to let go of one of their cooks. So it is just two ladies back there, right, doing their best to serve more than 100 students every day. And the sorting station really makes their jobs easier because when the trays get back to them, they're clean and there's no, they're easier to wash. It's more organized, right? And messes don't pile up. Custodians across all the schools we worked with have lauded this program. They love not having food and liquid in the trash bags. It saves their backs, and it avoids, disgusting messes when, right? We heard from one janitor who talked about the plastic forks the school used to have poking holes in the trash bags that were all full of liquid and food, and right, making a mess every time they had to take out the trash. So custodians love this, and for the school principal, who's right, very, very much focused on right, the school's bottom line. Beth Kellogg, principal at Brown Elementary, has this great quote where she talks about how, sorry, did I mute? Was I muted? Um, okay,
No, you're good, William.
okay. Um, this quote from Beth talks about how, on one hand, the school did not have to put a lot of money down to implement these things. And on the other hand, they're already seeing, right, and this was just 9 weeks after starting, already seeing benefits. Now switching gears to the social outcomes, I think I'm going to start off talking about nutrition because I think child nutrition is sort of the important social piece to this, right? Feeding our most vulnerable segment of the population, our most food insecure segment of the population here in Maine. So the graph on the left shows the impact of the share table or the share basket that I talked about earlier. These are all the schools, and this is the uh, pounds of wasted food per student served um, over the course of the study. And this is for all the schools for whom the share basket was a new intervention. A lot of schools, across the country utilize share baskets, and they're great. But I think this graph really shows the dramatic reduction of wasted food that's possible for schools who maybe haven't gotten around to implementing one yet. And then on the right side, number 2 was our more in-depth wasted food audit. We took 2 meals that were 2 of the same meals but a month apart, so like 2 pizza days with the same fruit and vegetable offerings, and we measured the amount of wasted fruits and vegetables and compared. And 3 of the 4 schools in 2023 and all 4 of the schools in 2025 saw big reductions in fruit and veggie waste, which means on one hand, students are eating more fruits and vegetables, or at the very least, they're sharing or not taking more than they know they're going to eat. And then write some testimonials here. Students, right, develop a sense of responsibility, right? They become responsible stewards of their school environment, and right, they're able to get an enjoyment from learning from their peers, from the fellow food rescue heroes, to do this kind of work. It's very right, especially the younger students we worked with. There's a lot of enjoyment they derive from this work, which I think a lot of people wouldn't expect. And then lastly, I'll talk about the environmental benefits, right? On the left, this is the our waste reduction trend, but instead of converted into dollars, now it's converted into tons of CO2 equivalent emissions, right? Landfilling food waste creates methane and other greenhouse gases. By reducing student food waste, we are making a big dent in climate change. Like, imagine if the whole country was doing this kind of work. The results really add up. And then just by taking what was wasted and taking it out of landfills into composting services or to feed animals or donation, etc., we diverted over 20,000 pounds of food that would be wasted otherwise. And then students also get to learn about how food waste relates to the environment, and it inspires the next generation of environmentalists in this kind of work. To wrap it up, we want to shout out how this work is continuing, right? As Hannah mentioned at the start, with the Maine School Cafeteria toolkit that we have developed, which takes all these insights, strategies, resources, puts it into one document that we were lucky enough to have the Maine Department of Education share with all Maine nutrition directors. And we'd be happy to share with anyone in the audience, of course. And to conclude with a little call to action, like Suzanne said at the start, this is really about bringing school food systems full circle, building on the awesome work that we've seen, especially in our state, getting local food into schools, high quality food into schools, but giving back a little, making sure that students are eating that great food, or at the very least, it's being utilized in some other way to make the system last long into the future. And that is what I have for you all. Thank you all so much for listening, for your chats, and I hope we can answer some of your questions coming up.
Thank you so much, William and Suzanne. That was really, really informative. And there are a lot of questions in the chat. So we've been aggregating them, and I'll sort of ask you some of those questions. And then if the folks who put those into the chat want to chime in and take yourself off mute, feel free.
Anna?
Yeah.
Can I just add a little note? Because I was reading some of the chat questions and about messaging. And one of the things that I guess we should really stress is that in our program, I mean, the name of it is No More Wasted Food Challenge, but we weren't really, measuring the students and checking their plate. So it was really for the school to try to reduce their waste, one. But most importantly, the program and the education was not just about reducing the food that was going into the compost bin. Half of the video, half of the presentation we did at the assembly was a portion called What is a Meal? And that was all about the nutrition aspects. And it was because one of the big reasons for waste is that students and even the kitchen staffs don't know what should go on a tray. Either they had the lesson many years ago when there were certain rules about what kids should eat, and they're still putting milks on every tray, and they don't really realize that students don't realize and staffs don't realize that students don't have to take a milk, that there is a, choose three sort of thing. So it was really important from the nutrition directors that we make that understanding about what is a meal and why the half cup of fruit and vegetable, half cup of fruit or vegetable is critical, is not to be a fight with you and the person serving you or you taking that half cup and throwing it away. We explain to them the importance of fruits and vegetables, helping you, run better, think better, and all this. So there is a whole second part of that education that is not just about, hey, don't throw food in the trash. So I think just to make that clear.
Thank you, Suzanne. Mm-hmm. All right, I'm going to dive into some of these questions. So one of early on when you had asked folks to share what concerns them most, one comment came through from Colleen about the challenge of identifying and maintaining whose quote job it is to maintain on-site compost. So I'm wondering if you could share some strategies that you've seen for developing and sharing ownership over the maintenance of composting and waste management systems, and maybe like which positions have you seen sort of taking that on as the lead?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's unfortunately something we've seen a lot is, right, a school might have a really great, right, school compost program, or, right, they've forged some connection with local farmers, but that one person leaves, retires or moves on, and the whole program comes to an end. We try to avoid that, obviously, and I think we have a good track record with the schools we work with, that they continue to do this kind of thing long after we've stopped working with them, like directly. And I think that starts with like our first two priorities when we reach out to any of these schools are getting buy-in from the principal and nutrition director from the start. If they're not believers, so to speak, it's really hard for any of this stuff to um, uh, get off the ground or not to mention last for a long time. Um, we've been very lucky. The schools we work with have, super passionate and receptive school nutrition directors, but we also like to identify key, teachers who have expressed an interest in this kind of work. One of the things we like to do is go to a faculty and staff meeting, or all faculty staff meeting, and give a little, short blurb about this project. And inevitably, some people, it sparks something in them and they want to get involved. Um, but right, it's super important to make sure that it's more than any one person, that it's the leadership, and it's something that, right, if there are, inevitable staff changes, that there can be a, directive from the top down that will keep these things going.
I would also say that one of the big key catalysts, because this is an issue, is that's why we have a triple bottom line, and the economics of getting the food out and reducing your waste disposal costs, that be understood by school board and also by the community. And that we've been forging partnerships between the schools and with their municipality, the solid waste folks, who in some cases have stepped in to pick up the costs or oversee composting or composting services for the schools because of that economics. And once it's instilled into a community beyond even the school, once that solid waste committee is seeing like, oh, this is a really good thing, they will continue to have it happen. But the biggest thing is, once you have that compost bin as part of your sorting station, if you want to compost it at your school, great. But if you lose that science teacher who doesn't want to do it anymore, you can always have a service provider pick it up, or you can have a farmer pick it up. So there are many options of what to do with that, even if your staffing changes. The other thing that people have recommended is making it a fee-based. I think very often faculty are given extra, stipends for doing the work. And so if it were a position that had a stipend associated, it's a lot easier to make sure that the transitions happen, that somebody is responsible because they're actually getting paid to do it. So those are some things we've seen.
Thank you both. There are a couple of questions throughout the presentation just about navigating potential unintended consequences. So there was a question about could composting potentially like quote condone waste if it seems like food is not wasted but rather being repurposed. There was another question about the sort of no waste challenge models and whether that could possibly encourage kids to ignore satiation signals and eat everything on their plates if they're full, just so they could sort of win a challenge. And then there's a third thing about kids being potentially afraid to try something new because if they don't like it and want to throw it out, they could lose a challenge or something like that. So just, do you have any thoughts on like how schools are sort of navigating some of those things through these programs?
Yeah, I don't know. I could start backwards thinking about trying new things. This is right. I've had this conversation with a lot of kitchen staff, right, where they have some like a persimmon or something, or some fruit that students may not be familiar with, and they are really disappointed to see it, right, either a lot of it end up in the waste bin, or students just not interested in it. I know a lot of schools utilize right. I think that they might have a couple different names, but they will take classroom time to try fruits and vegetables that they might be interested or considering serving in the cafeteria. And then one school we worked with, the kitchen director had developed a sort of like a sort of lunch evaluation that she would send out to like a select group of students who right were willing to give feedback on the lunch. And that these are just a couple things that the kitchen staff do to get a sense of right likes and dislikes and right will this work if we try it. So there are some forums, outside of the cafeteria where you can try to develop new tastes, and then right it's always a good idea to ask your students what they want to eat. Right. Obviously, I think we have one of our principals said to us once, like, if we just served chicken nuggets and mac and cheese every day, this wouldn't be a problem. Um, and right there's truth to that, but I think, as a whole, students will surprise you with what they'll eat if they're sort of eased into it in the right way. Um, and then thinking about right, some sort of like, the unintended consequences of the competition setup. Um, I think that's something, we've gone back and forth with. It's not always right when we go to these schools, like at the end of the study, we're not comparing them right to the other schools, saying like, oh, you should have eaten more, or or something, anything like that. One school we worked with did have a they this was the idea of their principal, but to have a grade versus grade competition because their lunches were divided up like that, so it was easy. Um, I don't think that it's not feedback that we've heard that students are right, overeating or right, to your first point about the right condoning waste or under eating for the same reason. I think uh, thinking about that first point again, right? Does the sorting kind of condone waste if you know it's, oh well, at least it's not going in the trash, so I don't have to eat it. Um, I don't think we see that happening, just considering the downward trend of plate waste we see. Um, but what we do see happening, for instance, at the school who was feeding it to a pig, right, the food scraps to a pig, they had a little, picture of a pig on the waste bin and said, I don't eat plastic. So I think there's more. I think students are more conscientious about what they are putting in that bin. Um, then obviously, I think when you just have the one trash bin, they tend to waste indiscriminately. Yeah,
Also,
Suzanne,
I
go
mean,
ahead.
we should mention that there's a food waste hierarchy, and we do cover that with the kids. As a matter of fact, it's one of the
Hmm.
posters in the cafeteria, and it reminds them that the number one thing, and we go over this with them in this assembly, the number one thing is to prevent the waste of food. Then feed people, use the share basket, and compost is sort of lower down the thing. So there's no sense of like, well, it's just fine. They understand that there's a prioritization, and we do teach that as part of it.
Thanks. That sort of is a nice segue into two other questions. And before I get into that, I also just want to ask folks, we're going to share a one question evaluation that helps us plan our future webinars. So if you have a moment, we would really appreciate if y'all could fill that out as we continue to move through these questions. So your responses sort of make me think of two other questions in here. One was just around getting feedback from the students, and it sounds like that is an important part of these programs, is hearing from them, like how they think it's going and what their perspectives are. And the other gets to the sort of like the signage and the process for knowing what the cleanup looks like. And Kristen said, I'm piloting something like this next month. I'm worried the adjustment for students will take time away for them to eat because of the cleanup. Any tips on how to navigate that?
Yeah, I think, well, okay. I mean, I think first and foremost, it helps having the food rescue hero type students. So maybe older students in your school who, get it more, quickly than the younger students. Having them help out with that process is really speeds things up, especially in those early days. But also, before we implemented the sorting station, you might have noticed in the slideshow, the sorting stations don't look the same at, any two schools. We like to sort of, assess the flow of students in the cafeteria, and get a sense of, how can we position this best where it sort of aligns with how the students move, in and out of the cafeteria and how to make it sort of, flow best. That is definitely a concern that, we've heard before. Right? Is this going to take up too much time? They already don't have a lot of time to eat. Um, Generally, the longer you do it, uh, the less of a problem it is.
And I would just add, William mentioned 100 student schools. I mean, this works in 600. Some of our largest schools had 600, 700 students that they were processing through the cafeteria at lunchtime, and that still happened. They weren't adding any time, and it's just a different process. And once the students learn it, it's not an issue. No.
Thanks. So we've been talking a lot about what's happening in the cafeteria. Can you talk a little bit about food waste in the back of house and how much of your research how much that was evaluated in your research? And then this is from Lily. There's a clarification. Was the bulk of this program interventions following WWF Food Waste Warriors, or was the research part separate from the toolkit?
I'll take that question. I've been working on it for the two studies that we did. The work that we did, the program is a combination of best practices from school food waste programs from across the state. So I would say from Oakland, California to, Food Waste Warriors, we've integrated elements that have proven successful. We've integrated them into our work. But it's not the same. We got funding from World Wildlife to do the study using our approach and our materials. So that's the connection there. So you will see something similar, but it is our own program, but funded in year 2 by World Wildlife.
Yeah, and in terms of the back of the house, I think both study years we only had half the participating schools recording that data. And that was right. That was a big ask on top of what we were already asking. The typically understaffed kitchens to take on. So not all of them, right, even wanted to do that kind of work. Sorry, but the other thing we found is that the kitchens often don't have a lot of control over how much they're wasting. I think Suzanne went to a school once that had just received a shipment of watermelon that was all rotten. So that right there, that 1 week of kitchen waste measurement from them was a huge outlier compared with everything else. And right, the sort of they all have systems in place for like evaluating their suppliers and right if something like that becomes a problem of changing things up. So
and maybe in the first year we saw like 15 versus 85%. So 15% in the kitchen and 85% was actually with the student involved waste. And that's a practice we know because we work with restaurants. They have a lot of procedures to manage waste, and the problem is the plate waste.
Well, y'all have shared a lot of really, really incredible information. We have about 1 minute left, and I still have a handful of questions. So I'm hoping that it'll be okay if we share your information in our follow-up email and people can continue to follow up. Maybe in our last 30 seconds, is there one policy or piece of legislation that your team is advocating for right now at the state or federal level that folks can follow along with? That could be a follow-up in the email as well, if you want a minute to think about that.
Well, I would say from a policy standpoint, we're thinking of, that is the next step in the process, to use this proof of concept to actually form some legislation that will support these good efforts that schools are doing. So it won't be up to individual teacher or principal or one nutrition director to carry the burden. So with the alliance with the Department of Education, we will look to see what would make sense, I think, in the future. But definitely that is the plan.
Yeah. And then LD 1065, our institutional food waste ban that passed this past summer, that was a huge win. That's sort of coincided with the end of this study. Yeah.
Great. Well,
And
thank
William
you.
is doing a lot. He's doing a lot of work with middle school and high school. I saw the questions from middle school, high schools. So we haven't forgotten you. It's just right now elementary schools, but keep in touch with William. He's doing a lot of additional good work.
Thank you both very, very much for this really informative presentation. Thank you to our audience for being so active and engaged. And if you didn't have your questions answered, we will share those with Suzanne and William and connect you, and you can continue the conversation after this. So thank you all very much. Thank you for filling out the evaluation, and have a great rest of your day.